Okay. Um, yeah, so what I have open right here is just a GitHub repository with the custom mods that I've been working on. Um, some of these are just directly from the custom mods that David had made initially. Then I kind of ended up extending some of them, changing some of them, and working on adding new things. Um, and so kind of all I know about the custom mod stuff is just um, just the stuff I had to figure out in order to kind of do what I wanted in the moment to make the specific changes that I was trying to make. Um, let's see. I think this is a pretty simple one to start with. So there's kind of two different kinds of things. One is user script mods, and then the other is custom tools. So the user script mods would be like the Bezier tool. Let me see if I can. Um, right. So there's like mods, those are these things, and then custom tools, those are these things. The custom tools kind of hook into uh, line writer stuff more deeply. Um, it's like, for example, if you wanted to interact with the canvas, uh, that's what you'd have to write a custom tool um, to do things with like mouse events and stuff, uh, or whatever it is. So those are custom tools. Custom mods are, I think, as far as I am aware, it's like stuff you would be doing with a selection. So you would have like some lines, and then you select them, and then you can work with them in a custom mod to do whatever it is. Um, it might also be possible to do other things with custom mods. I just haven't looked into it yet because I haven't gotten around to doing anything that would need to do that. Although there is a extensive wish list of features and mods that people want or improvements that I want to make. So I think what I'll do is I'll just start with refreshing myself and walking through this selection metadata custom mod, because this is a very simple one and it just has kind of most of the essentials and uh, doesn't have details that we don't need to worry about. So this mod basically is a thing that edits the like properties of these lines. Um, so, for example, by default, the lines have like a multiplier of 1, uh, but then we can kind of change that to adjust the acceleration. That's kind of what I've implemented so far. Um, and so that's kind of what will be going on in as we walk through it. Um, let's see. So this is like stuff that probably only makes sense if you've worked with JavaScript and specifically React and Redux. But these are some uh, basically some commands that you can issue to tell linewriter to do certain things. For example, to change particular lines, you would like issue one of these actions basically into the line writer's kind of state management engine, where state is basically all the properties of the points and lines and so on. So there's like that's kind of a thing, and then we'll kind of see that going on below, like dispatching a command into the store, which has all the state of the line writer universe. Um, yeah, and then this is kind of another of those things that's related to Redux, specifically for JavaScript front end things, where you can get particular pieces of state from the store, which has all the state. So that would be a way that you could, for example, get the current selection by getting the state of the select tool and then doing stuff with that. Um, So this is kind of getting into some of how linerider.com is built, and you'll kind of need to work around that in order to do anything with mods. Um, so each of these user script mods has like a class that has some things in it, and I'm kind of rusty on exactly what those things are. And then it has like a function that registers the mod and kind of plugs it into the linewriter engine. Uh, and then there's other stuff that I never really looked into here. And then there's, of course, just some utility function. Um, so I forget what the specific relationship is between like this class and like what belongs in this class versus what belongs in this main function. But this is kind of the entry point into the mod. So maybe we can just start here and I'll just talk my way through this as I kind of figure out what it's doing again. um, so previously I had mentioned something called React. React is basically the framework for that is used to make this user interface. Um, and so that is what's going on here. It's basically, it has a way for us to create HTML elements, for example, buttons or sliders or other things that would get shown somewhere. So that's kind of where we're getting a handle to the React thing so we can do stuff with the front end. So there's this like class here, which is a React component. A component is basically a unit of the user interface. So a component might be like this panel, or a component could be like this row of elements, or it could be like a specific slider. Those are all basically components. Um, and so here we're creating a component that has all of the user interface elements for the mod here. So this component should basically create the checkboxes, the number spinners, the sliders, the buttons, and then also it should hook these things into some variables that represent the actual things these are adjusting. So that's kind of this, where the component has like a state, which is like includes everything from here, and then also includes some additional things. So for example, the state contains it starts out with flipped equals false, negative multiplier equals false, the small multiplier is 1, the large multiplier is 0, and so on. And you can see kind of those things correspond to this flip checkbox, this negative multiplier checkbox, this multiplier small spinner, this multiplier large spinner, and so on. So that's kind of what's going on here. So if you wanted to add additional user interface elements, you would create some additional things inside the state to hold the values that those elements would correspond to. Um, okay, so that's the state in this component. And then there's this mod thing, which is this big class up here. And I forget exactly what this does. So we'll figure that out later, soon-ish. But we're basically just initializing the mod with some references to the linewriter's store, where it contains all of the linewriter state, as well as this mod's own state. This is the way that we can pass in these numbers or values or variables into the mod itself. And then I have no idea what this is. um, see, reset UI. This is I guess this is like a function that the mod can call to reset the UI. Or I don't, I'm not, I don't think I ever touched this. This was kind of stuff I copied over from some mod David made. Okay. And then, so what else is happening when we create an instance of this component? Let's see. We are listening to changes in linewriter's store, where it has all of the linewriter state. And it looks like we're using some of these selectors that I mentioned above to pull some values from the store. And specifically, the way this works is like when a value in linewriter's store changes, then this code runs. And whenever those values, the relevant values in the store change, then this code runs again. I think that's what's going on. I'm a bit rusty, so I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what is going on here. So basically, what we're doing is we're listening to the store, and whenever the active tool is the selection tool, so this tool, then we will kind of do some. What those things are exactly, uh, it depends on what the mod is, what you want the mod to do. Here, it looks like what I'm doing is whenever I change the tool from the selection tool to something else, then this thing closes. Yeah, that's what happened then. So this is probably just stuff I copied from David's original mods. Um, oh, it definitely is stuff I copied. I never touched. Um, component will update. This is another piece of functionality that's provided by this component here. And I don't know what it does, but it's related to how React works. Um, I think what I assume here is basically, yeah, no, I don't know what this does. Um, let's see. There's some additional things that I wrote. So for example, this mod has like oh, I don't know what that is either. Uh, this, I definitely wrote this, but I forget where it's coming from. But it's basically like there's this function that we can call, and we call it, it does some stuff, right? So what it's doing here is it is changing the state of this component. And so this function can be called from other places. For example, maybe I have a button, and when the button is pressed, then it calls this function, and then this code is run. I think that's probably what's going on. This code is run when this other function is called, and that one is called when a button is pressed. Okay, yeah. So it looks like what's happening is when I press the load button, so I have some selection, and then I load it, and then that reads the values from the linerider store and puts it into the user interface here. Basically, this code is being run. It's loading some data into the state of this component when I press that button. Kind of just all it's doing. Um, on commit, this is a function that's called when this commit button is pressed, right? So this is kind of a similar thing with like this other function here where down below I'm telling the button when you're pressed, then run this function, which does work. What it does is it tells the mod itself to kind of, I guess, commit the changes. So probably that means it tells the mod to modify the selected lines with some new properties. For example, different multiplier values. And then it also updates the state of this component. Um, so here, what it just does is when I press the commit button, then it closes this. Yeah. Let's see. On activate. Probably this function is just whatever. Okay. Yeah, this function is called when this button is pressed. So that just opens the thing. I don't think I touched this function, so you probably won't need to unless you're doing some extra interesting stuff. Um, these are some functions that I basically took from David's mods, but they're just things to make it easier to create checkboxes and sliders. And yeah, really, I think the best way to understand this would just be to try using it and see how things break until you fix things enough that they work. That's kind of my approach to mods, line runner mods in general. Um, and then this one is the thing where we actually kind of create the user interface here. So for example, you can see if the panel is open, then we're going to have some checkboxes and some sliders and stuff. And that's all going in here. Um, and then yeah, this is kind of this main button here for the mod. So that was a lot, and that was maybe about half of this file. Any questions so far? I imagine you probably have some, or maybe you don't know where to start, because it's kind of overwhelming. I think for me, really the best way to learn it is by starting with a mod someone else made, like David made, or a mod I previously made, and then try to change it until it does something new that I want it to do. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So there are a bajillion resources on the internet for learning this kind of stuff, but I personally don't know which ones are good or helpful or like a very clear introduction. Um, Probably the best way to learn those things would actually be to kind of do some like 1 day projects where you build like a small website or app, like a one page app with like 2 buttons or something that like does something. That's kind of, I think, learning by doing is going to be the best way to learn React uh, for at least linerider mod development. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would recommend first just doing stuff with React and ignoring Redux. Because Redux is that one was kind of a steep learning curve for me because it's like there's a lot of it's kind of conceptually dense, um, or hard to kind of fully understand. The only way I was able to kind of figure out how to use Redux was by like trying to use it and then failing and then seeing what was going wrong. And then that was, yeah, I think that's kind of, I think for Redux it is, I would recommend kind of reading about it and about how it works. Let me see if I can find something actually. Because for that one, I do have a recommendation, which is this. So this is reduxbook.com. And this kind of is a good introduction to like the concept of Redux and why it's maybe a bit weird and what it does. I think probably you would only need to look through part one, but you would want to go through part one in order to understand, like, in order to understand what these things are and why they are here. So that's just Redux. And probably you'll also, that I think that was the only kind of guide that I read about Redux, and everything else that I learned about that was just through working on a project that used it. Yeah, so we went over the React component, which was like kind of the user interface stuff, and that's all the code that binds these user interface elements into variables in JavaScript. That's kind of those are the variables. And then what we're doing here is like when certain buttons are pressed in this component, then that causes some code in the this mod class to be run. So I think what the goal here is to kind of separate the logic of the mod, which would all live in this mod class, to separate the logic from the actual user interface itself. And the user interface stuff would then go into this React component. Okay, so we went over the React component, and now let's look at this mod. I think probably the best way to do this is going to be to see what methods from the mod are being called, right? So we're calling the onUpdate method, we're calling load originals, we're calling commit, and that is all. And then the other thing we're doing is we're creating the mod and giving it the state variable. Okay, so what would be a good place to start? Let's start with load original. So here's load originals. Um, what it's doing here, what is it doing here? So it's using something called this dot selected point. Yeah, where is that coming from, right? That is the first thing we need to figure out. Um, that is coming from on update. Okay, maybe on update is actually the better place to start then. Let's see. Uh, yeah, I think we should start with on update. So the way I think of on update is probably on update is called whenever something changes in linerider's store. Whenever some piece of linerider's entire state changes. Uh, and specifically on update is probably only called. Actually, I don't know if I can say anything about that. Um, yeah, I don't think I can say anything about that because I'm rusty on React Redux stuff. Okay, so on update. So basically, um, whenever this is called, then we do some work. What work do? We figure out what changed, I think. We figure out if something should be changed, and then we change the internal state of the mod accordingly. I think that's what's going on. So for example, we're like getting the active tool, uh, seeing what points are currently selected. Um, if we don't want to update, then we don't do any more work. If something changed, then we will like what will we do? We'll figure out what lines were selected, and then we will. Uh, oh wait, yeah, I don't. What is going on here? There's some. There is maybe I think I have a incorrect understanding of this function and what is going on. Let's see. Component will update. This is a React thing. Yeah. Um, okay, so one thing is unknown for me right now, which is when exactly is this being called, right? I'm not sure when on update is being called. This comes down to how React works, and maybe we actually need to figure that out first. Uh, I will also mention React has gone through some kind of design changes in the past few years, and this is kind of an older way of doing React, but I didn't want to mess around with doing things in the modern way here. But that's just one note that some of what you might learn in tutorials or projects might look different than this. But generally, older resources will probably look like this. Uh, what is this? Just before rendering when new props or state are received. So when is new state being received, right? Um, I don't know. Probably it is when these values are changed. That's my best guess. Let's work under that assumption and see if anything else looks wrong. We look at this. Um, so when these things are changed, or when the line writer's global state is changed, then I think that's when this onUpdate method is being called. Um, if the state has changed, then we decide we want to update some stuff. I think that's what's going on here. Uh, a lot of this is like stuff that I copied from mods David wrote and didn't change. So I think I'll need to actually walk a bit more slowly through this. Get simulator committed track. I have no idea what that is. And there isn't any documentation about that. If the track has changed though, then we decide we want to update. I don't know what the track is. Here's the select tool state. And we're getting the selected points. If there are no selected points, then that's we say so. What is this? If the selected points have changed, then we decide we want to update. That's kind of what we're doing here. Okay, if we decide we don't want to update, then we don't do any further work. Okay, so what if we decide we do want to update? Then, okay, here's again with the track. I don't know what that is. Oh, maybe is this track change? No, yeah, no, I don't know what that is. There's this thing called edit scene, and I also don't remember that, but I believe it's related to like drawing of some of these other UI elements. So I think, for example, the scene is something I did stuff with when I was doing like changing how this this box that's being drawn when I change how that behaves for the rotate mod, or like when I drew these things or change how these things are drawn, stuff like that. So yeah, it's possible to like draw additional things into the canvas here. And I believe that has something to do with like the edit scene or scenes in general. Okay, if this is not active return, I believe active is basically representing whether this thing is open. If it's not, then we don't do anything. Okay, so we previously got the selected points from this select tool, and now we're figuring out what the lines are, and that's what this is doing. Um, and then I think what I'm doing here is I'm making a copy of the data about the selected lines. Um, and then I am uh, oh, and then I am actually modifying linerider's line property data with this. So this is why like when close this mod. This is why when, for example, uh, uh, I change the slider, the line writer universe itself changes, right? Like the physics are changing as I'm changing the uh, as I'm changing the state of this UI element. Uh, so as I'm changing the state of this UI element, then onUpdate is being called a bunch of times. It's being called every single time that like this UI element changes, and then it's kind of telling linewriter, okay, this line now has multiplier like 0.35 or it now has multiplier 0.59. Um, and then these changes here are just kind of temporary changes. They're not saved yet. In order to save them, we press the commit button, which calls like the commit changes method somewhere in this class. It's the commit method here, and that's kind of what it's doing. So we can look at that later. But okay, so basically this is the onUpdate method here is whenever the state of the mod is changing, for example, the slider is being dragged, then it is kind of telling linewriter some states to modify. And those are temporary modification, the way things work right now, which is like this store, dispatch, set line. Is basically we're telling linerider store, here are the new lines, but they are not committed yet. They're not saved yet. Okay, so that was the on update method. This is probably where a lot of where this you would probably be doing a lot of things here if you're doing anything with like the current selection. Let's see. Any questions so far? Okay. In that case, I'll keep going. So we were just I was just kind of remembering the existence of the commit method in this class. So maybe we can look at that. So this is the commit method, and where is it being called from, right? It's being called when we press the commit button. Okay, I believe that's what's going on. The commit button causes the React components on commit method to be called, and then that's causing the mods commit method to be called. Yeah. Okay, so that's where commit is. That's how we're triggering a commit. So, okay, if the state changed, if we have like unsaved changes, I think that's what this dot change represents. Then we're telling linerider store, we're telling linerider store that we had like that we want it to save all of the temporary changes we told it about, and then it should forget those temporary changes. Um, because we saved them. And then I guess it also resets any of these like custom drawings we might have. Um, yeah. So that's commit. Okay, that's a small one. What else is happening here? We looked at on update. We looked at commit. There's also load original. So where is that being called? That's just being called with the on reset all button, on reset all function. And that's being called when we load. Yeah, so this is kind of specific to this mod that I wrote, which is the idea is when I make a selection and I press load, then it should load the line multipliers into these things. So it resets the UI. That's why I'm calling it reset all. Um, and so, yeah, what is load originals doing here? Basically, we're loading the line properties from linerider. That's all it's doing. So we're getting the selected points, we're getting the lines, and then if the line multiplier is the same for all the selected lines, then we set that as the state, I believe. Let me find where that exactly is happening. We track we loaded the original values. We look at the first line of the selection, and then the the first line of selection, we check its multiplier, and then we save that in our mod state as the original multiplier. Okay, yeah, so that's what's going on here. Yeah, that was load origin. Where is reload state? It's not being called. We don't. That's not being called either. Okay, so I think we actually just finished looking at this entire mod. um, Yeah, so we got really into the weeds, right? That was kind of the depth first approach to figuring out what's going on. Let's see if I've figured out any kind of high level general pieces of knowledge that we can take away from this. Um, hmm. I think the first one is kind of one thing I already mentioned, which is kind of there's the React component, which is the UI stuff, and it connects values, state values from the linerider store or from internal variables. It connects those to the UI elements. And then the mod uh, is its own kind of uh, self-contained piece of functionality, which interacts more deeply with linerider's Redux store, which contains all of the linerider state. And so those deeper interactions could look like telling the canvas to draw some additional things. It could look like telling the linerider that a line has changed in some way. Maybe it's being moved or its properties are being changed. Um, or it could, another other interactions could be like doing things with like the undo history or any kinds of like stuff that any kinds of interesting things you want to change about linerider's behavior or new functionalities you want to add to linerider. That would all be stuff that you'd be implementing in here. And I think the way to kind of get started with making a mod would be to start from an existing mod and kind of change things. That's kind of how I've been doing it because there's so much that I don't understand yet about how linerider.com works. But there's probably like the pattern you would follow is, at least if you're doing things with line selections, is you would have like a on update that gets the line selection, uh, modifies the lines based on the internal state of the mod, and then updates linerider with it. You would also probably want to have a commit button that tells linerider to save those temporary changes that we made with on update. Um, and everything else is kind of specific to your mod. So these are all kind of specific to this selection metadata mod. Let's see if so the transform mod is rather complicated, but maybe we can see the same pattern here because they're both just like line selection mods, really. Um, so this is a transform mod. We have that same commit method, which is literally the same. This was copy pasted from this one. We have this on update, which most of this is the same. So I think this is all the same stuff because I copy pasted one mod to create the other. This is all the same. Yeah. And then, so here's like where the interesting mod specific stuff here is happening, right? I'm getting the selected lines, and then, or this is like also David did this originally and I modified this heavily, is I'm kind of doing all this geometry on the selected lines. And then what? Then I'm telling linerider's store, here's the update that you should save. And that's kind of all that's happening. And then here's like all of this mod specific stuff. And then we see a similar story in the React component here. We're just storing some internal state, which is directly tied to the values of these sliders and these checkboxes and so on. A lot of these things will look the same. I think you probably won't need to change most of these things. And then this is kind of where the mod specific interesting behavior happens, where I'm showing different sliders based on which checkboxes are being checked. But it's the same pattern. Okay, so and then these are mod specific utility functions. So yeah, it's the same pattern there. Custom tools is kind of a whole different beast, and I'm even less familiar with custom tools. So I'm not sure I can go over it very helpfully. But it's kind of a similar thing where there's a tool and then there's a React component. And the React component, like there's still, once again, there's this render method where we draw all the sliders and checkboxes and buttons. And then we have this this custom tool which does stuff. And I don't really know how this works. Like default tool is something that David created for linerider.com, I believe. And then so basically linerider hooks into it calls these methods, and then we can just make it do different things. Uh, but I don't know. I don't really know how it works. Yeah, so that is all I have really. Anything you can think of that I might have missed or that might be interesting for me to go over? Yeah, it's like pretty scattered, I think. And the way to organize it would be to actually write documentation. I think probably if you would be interested in um, writing notes for yourself about how things work or making a specific mod, I'd be happy to kind of help. Um, and then from that, we could maybe create at least some kind of a written reference or tutorial or something. Um, that's one thing we could do. I think the other thing is that a lot of this code is kind of messy. Um, and so that does make it harder to understand. Um, So that is a problem. But yeah, another way to if we wanted to create some kind of documentation could be even just to go through the existing files or for you to like uh yeah, I think it would be helpful. It could be useful if you went through a file and then like annotated it with notes, right? And then I can look over things and add things that I think of additional notes or whatever, and that could also be another way that we can move from where we are now, which is no documentation whatsoever, and to some kind of documentation. But only if you want to do that. It's not something I'm actively, eagerly trying to do. Yeah. I think also another thing, if you are shorter on time, one option could be that you uh, point out things where you have questions, and then I answer them, and then that way I just write notes directly into the thing as I go. If documentation is not so much your thing, I think for me it's like hard for me to start writing stuff, but if I'm given a prompt, then it's pretty easy for me. But yeah, all up to you. Mm. Yeah, let's do it that way. What kinds of things are you thinking of for a first mod or first few uh, mods? Any ideas that you've been tossing around? Right. Yeah. Mm, right. Yeah, that would be very interesting. Unfortunately, from my end, I don't know how one would go about doing those things. um, Let me think. Because I guess really all I've done basically is making variations upon selection mod. This would be kind of like, yeah, adding new lines. This is a different kind of thing. Um, Let me think. I think I guess it kind of depends on the specific functionality that you would want, but probably you would end up doing something. Let me just go back to the selection metadata mod, and then the other thing I want to open is the polygon or the line tool mod, the line tool custom tool. Um, right. So one thing you would want to figure out, and I don't remember exactly what it is like how to create line. It's gonna look something like one of these things. It'll be like a type, probably like add lines or create lines, and then there's a payload which would just have the list of lines, probably. Um, and then you could call that the way I call update line, or the way I call set lines, I guess. So it would be like this dot store dot dispatch add lines, and then you would have your line data, and then you just pass that in. One thing you might need to do is take a look at, like one thing you could do, for example, here is um, just add a console.log lines right after this, and then you can take a look at what the shape of the lines data structure is, and then you can kind of make your own to match that. And then you can just call like add lines or whatever. The other thing is this is kind of a much uglier way of doing it, but that's what I did because I didn't know how to add lines the right way. Is there is a function that linerider makes available in the JavaScript console to add lines, and let me see where that is. Um, It's window.addLine. So probably window.addLine is just calling like this.store.dispatch something something something. But that would be the way that you would add line. This is the dirty way, and then something like this would be the clean way. So if you wanted to generate static by adding lines, you would do something like that. You can generate your list of lines, and then you can somehow add those lines in. Let me see. So there's this like paste bin that I think it was M. Henry or somebody uh, had shared a while back. And I don't know if this might have anything relevant, but I'm going to look right now. I don't know. I It looks like there is not anything. He's also using AppLine. Um, so yeah. Let me see. I think I had it with OTDE Banky some time ago, and maybe there was an answer from them. Let's see. Uh, Maybe did I take notes on this anywhere? No. Okay, maybe I didn't ask OTD that. Um, yeah, so probably the first thing you could just start with doing window.addLine. I think that would be fine. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, I think if you want, so yeah, let's think about this static generation mod. I think the maybe a early question to ask would be how would you set where to put the static and how big the static area is. That could be maybe a first thing to think about because the answer to that question will probably determine whether you create a custom mod or a custom tool. Yeah, the main difference is that the class that you would write is gonna look completely different. Um, Basically, the way I think of it is like a custom mod, I have a lot of control over what it does. It's just like whenever something changes, I can decide whatever I want to do, right? With a custom tool, it's more like linerider expects us to give it something that it will call the methods of. So linerider will say, okay, when this event happens, I'm going to call the onPointerUp method, right? So it's like here, this requires a somewhat of a deeper understanding of how linerider does things with tools. Um, so that's kind of a practical consideration in terms of just like how you would go about implementing things. Um, For example, I think like the really the only reference there is of a custom tool that David wrote is the Bezier tool. And this one is really complicated because it's doing some pretty complicated things. And there's like stuff related to edit states and things that I just don't understand. And then there's also like other stuff related to Bezier specific functionality. And I think probably really what I want to do is fix some of the issues with my dot line tool and my polygon tool until we I reach a point where it's like now there's at least kind of a simple template for if you want to have a tool where when you click on something, then it generates some stuff based on the click location. Um, this would be kind of a good template. So for example, if you want to generate static around a place that you click, then you would probably be using you would be making a custom tool, and it probably looks something similar to this, where it's like once the click is released, then you add the lines, and that would be one easy way to get started at least. If you wanted to do the custom mod route, probably what you would have to do is create sliders that set the position of the static, and that's going to be a very clunky user interface. Yeah, but it would also be more precise. You could tell it add generated static around position 502.1 and whatever 106 or whatever random number. Center of the camera is also an interesting one because I want to do that for other things, or I need to know the camera location for some uh, feature requests that someone made for new mods. But I don't actually know how to really do things with the camera. Um, Let me actually check one thing real quick. See if I I think I took some notes on stuff related to camera here. Yeah. Uh, there's a lot of unknowns about doing things from the camera for me. This would be something that probably we would need to ask Banky about because I think they have access to see like what things we can call and how we might go about doing some of these things. Uh, but yeah, that's a big unknown, doing things from the camera. Right. Yeah, that would be a that would be useful for sure. I'm not sure who else has developed mods um, besides David and whoever made LR overlay. I don't know if that was David. Okay, yeah. So those would probably be the first people to ask. Otherwise, it would be like people who have developed linerider, would be the most helpful resources for how we would go about doing things that existing mods don't already do in terms of interactions with writers. Oh yeah, yeah. That would be I would love to watch that stream because there's stuff, yeah, that would be super useful. Um, I think I think like stuff with changing camera behavior is probably going to involve deeper interactions with linerider's engine because it's not just a matter of like the camera when you're doing preview mode, but also with the camera with during rendering, if that's something that you're thinking, if that, yeah. Because I know there's like I definitely want to do things that involve rotating the camera, and right now the only way to do that is post-production. Um, so that one, I think I don't know. I think like that would be kind of the same scope as custom camera controls that David did for like panning and zooming and so on. And so those might be deeper changes in Line Rider, possibly. I'm not sure. But yeah, anything else for this session at least? Yeah, let's call it a day here.